Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So Uber is quite a crazy topic, so I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about what we're doing in the region, then about myself and what I'm doing, and the $3.5 billion deal, if you heard about it, I'm more than happy to talk about it, and also kind of just the cool things we're doing in the region. And feel free afterwards if you have any questions about what we're doing, what I'm doing, if we have economic opportunities, job opportunities, more than happy to talk about it. So just for those who don't know, and I hope that's not many of you, so Uber is an app that connects riders to drivers. So we've been in the market since 2009. It really started as an idea where our two founders were in Paris and they wanted a taxi, but in Paris on a crazy night, if it's raining, so it's really hard to get a cab. You can't just hail and stop a driver on the streets. You literally have to go find a taxi queue and then ask them where you're going. If they don't like it, they'll say, sorry, it's not on my way. Then it's your problem to find the ride home. So they were like, I wish I could press a button and get a car. And that's kind of where it all started. And it started as a small company just for the CEO and his friends in San Francisco. And from there kind of expanded globally. I think in the last year was the craziest year for us. We grew from 150 cities to about 460 cities today. And the Middle East started around 2013. And now we're in about 15 cities in the region. I think the largest are Dubai, Riyadh, and Cairo, but as markets or as countries that we operate in, Saudi, UAE, and Egypt. And there's a lot of really cool things. A lot of people think about it as just a taxi company, but it's not really a taxi company. We're just a technology that links people who want a ride to people who are giving a ride to people. And that's the first part of it. But if you expand it to countries like Saudi Arabia, where a lot of women can't actually drive, services like Uber really changes the lives of people. I mean, I sound like I'm biased when I say these things, but really when you go and talk to people, it really makes a difference in their lives. And that's one. But two is kind of all the jobs or economic opportunities you can create. Huge unemployment of youth in Saudi or in Egypt. So when you come and say, hey, can you drive? Do you have a car? How about we find a way to legally allow you to go and start making money? Like one of our chiefs always says, hey, Uber is, press a button, get a ride. Why can't it be press a button and get some work? Because you can literally open the app, request a car, get some money, and if you're tired or you're not interested, then you can stop, and it's all up to you. So that's kind of a little bit about what we're doing in the region. Maybe to talk a little bit about my role, and if you're interested to hear a little bit more about it. So I lead public policy for Uber in Middle East and North Africa. Public policy is a very fancy way of just saying government relations. So making sure we have good relations with all the governments in the region, understanding what their needs are, and trying to find a way where we can work together. And essentially, I kind of live on a plane, and but it's really a pleasure to try to understand what each government wants and to be able to find a solution where you really impact the lives of people that's truly invaluable. So that's kind of a little bit about who I am, what I do, what our company is, and more than happy to get into the details of the deals, or kind of if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them now. And otherwise, afterwards, if you want to kind of talk more privately, more than happy to do so. So, any questions?
We can do this best thing since sliced bread. That wherever you go, the Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Control. How are you coping with that generally worldwide?
Okay, so that's a very cool question. So how are we dealing with all kind of the Empire Strikes Back, repercussions with taxis, etc.? That's a great question that we get all the time. Essentially, the way it works is that it's a new technology. People often misunderstand what we do and how it works, and often in countries where we have the most resistance, the resistance comes from decades of kind of investment in a monopoly that exists in most markets. For example, if you take the US, early 1950s, there were 13,250 taxi medallions in New York City. Today, there are still 13,250 medallions in New York City, even though the city grew exponentially. So by artificially reducing the number of kind of medallions you're allowed to have for people to run taxis, the price on the black market artificially went up. And today, it costs north of $1 million to buy the right to be a taxi driver in New York. And then they drive like Crown Victoria cars. Our CEO always talks about that, wow, for that kind of money, you should be driving a Bentley as a taxi. So Uber coming into the market, especially in places like the US, or I'll talk a little bit about France as well, that's a common example. But people tend to see it as a competitor, and often people are kind of used to, taxi was a monopoly for decades. They could, operate the way they do. make a few number of trips, charge you exorbitant amounts of money. Quality isn't always great, but then they make enough money, they go home, they're happy. But when you think about it, when we come into the market, the idea is to try to reduce the price for consumers to encourage more people to use it. But that means people have to do more trips per hour. But by doing that, so instead of kind of charging one person $10 and waiting half an hour and working half an hour, you're working the full hour, so you're being more productive with your time, but giving two people a chance to pay $5 each, if that makes sense. In Paris, for example, and maybe what's interesting to say is, there are countries where there are no laws that govern what Uber started to do. There are countries where there are laws that explicitly ban what we do, and there's countries where it's kind of not very clear. And in France, for example, when we started, there were no law governing what we did on a certain product, which is, for example, you using your own car for commercial purposes. It's actually a good thing. Most people's cars sit in garages all day. You only use it for about an hour a day, hour and a half a day to go back to work and maybe run a few errands. But in reality, I think 90% of the time it's underutilized. So the idea is, why don't you start using that for other purposes than just going to work and back? You can use it commercially. So that started, became very successful. Then you have, governments trying to find a way to regulate it, but in certain places they might kind of, overstep kind of what is good for consumers, and that's when we have discussions and debates. And for example, the European Union, in France in this case, said, hey, this law that the French government passed doesn't really make sense for consumers. It's actually protecting an established monopoly. Let's have a look at that. So the way we kind of address these things is just through dialogue and constant engagement with governments, and just trying to find mutually beneficial solutions for us, for consumers, for drivers, and for the governments as well. And I hope that kind of gives you an answer to your question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, often it's really competition at the end of the day. So yeah, but then we're also going to do other things. For example, we're starting to do like food delivery, we're starting to do parcel delivery. So there's a number of different things we're going to get into. As most tech companies, you really start in one thing. Like Google started as just a search engine, and now they do anything from, putting balloons up in the air, making sure everyone has Wi-Fi in the world, and robotics and crazy things. I hope like we get to a place where Uber can kind of, go beyond just the kind of Empire Strikes Back type approach versus, something meaningful for the rest of the world. Any other questions?
What about in Dubai? Okay, my question is, what's happening in Dubai? Aren't the taxi drivers tearing their hair out because you boys are on the scene? What are you doing here?
Yeah, so in Dubai, actually, there's us and a competitor called Careem. They were here a year before we were, so we started in 2013 here. They were there a year before us. It's kind of a similar concept. As anywhere in the world, I think it's increased competition that kind of literally, helps people kind of be more productive. And essentially, the way we operate in Dubai is actually fully licensed. We can't actually let you use your own car. It's against the law. And so the only people that can actually drive are people who are licensed drivers who work with limo companies. And what we do is we partner with these individuals or limo companies and kind of just make sure that they get business by, marketing our services to you, that you start using the platform so that they can get more jobs. I think it's just a perception, at least in the UAE, where, when we consider the market as Uber, we don't look at taxis. We look at how many, modes of transportations are used in a city, which means your personal trips, bikes, cars, trucks, trains, everything. And then we look at, how many of those are being taken on Uber, and how can we make sure more are on Uber, and how can we support and complement the rest of the public transportation. In Dubai, it's more a perception issue because we're a single-digit % ourselves and the competitors combined of the kind of the space we're talking about. Yeah, I think someone earlier, you asked me about it earlier. It's something that started off as a one-off that we did for, so when there was the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, traffic is usually crazy to get to Abu Dhabi and the Grand Prix in particular. So we partner up with an organization where you can actually take a chopper from Dubai that would fly you to the Grand Prix and take you to like a super fancy stand. It was super successful. And the way it works is, we send you a car to your house, it picks you up, takes you to the Atlantis where there's a helipad, and then the chopper takes you to Abu Dhabi, and then there's a car to take you, to wherever you are. It's actually not that expensive compared to when you think about taking a chopper. It's not that bad. And it was super successful. So what we're doing now is we're keeping it for on a weekly basis. And if you're interested, the way it works now is it picks you up from home, takes you to the Atlantis, then you do a tour of Dubai, it's a tourism tour. So it's a 20, 25 minute chopper tour, and then drops you back at the Atlantis and back home. That's 500 dirhams per person. So for a helicopter ride plus ride home and back, it's not that bad.
Just interested in the due diligence around the ground, government relations, and how you handle in developing markets like India, and the aspects of qualifications of taxi drivers and moving passengers.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't cover India, so I can't give a lot of details on India. But so on the driver qualification side, let's take India as an example on the high level, then I'll give more specifics about my region because I know that more. But every time we have drivers coming in, so they firstly have to come to the office. They have an application process. We make sure that they don't have any criminal records. Clear criminal records, no problems in the past. Clean driver's license. We make sure that everything is fine from a pre-processing aspect. We then interview them personally. Then there's a training element of how to use the application, but also how to make sure how do you deal with women? How do you make sure they're comfortable? How do you make sure they're not feeling harassed in a way? And I'll talk about one example of that in Egypt that we did a really cool job with an organization. But there's one thing I'd like to say is in India in particular, there's a problem in general that's rampant, the rape issue in India. So it's difficult to predict the future behavior of people based on past. Even if for your whole life you've been a saint, you cannot predict the future. And I think we're held to higher account than other people because of our brand, our presence, etc. And one really nice thing we did in Egypt, for example, is we partner with an organization called HADDAD. And essentially what they do is they train people, and they trained all our drivers in Egypt on kind of, prevention measures for sexual harassment to women. Particularly in Egypt is notorious for harassment. So we try to kind of really explain to drivers how, sometimes just saying hi in the wrong way may be perceived as, harassing to a woman. So how to be kind of more poised, more calm, how to make sure that they feel safe, how to make sure that, they don't feel like you're intruding in the space. So, and each country, it's its own. So I hope that kind of gives you a sense of what we do. Thank you.
Very quick question.
Hi.
What did you do at St. Andrews, and how did that help you in the job that you have now?
Very cool question. So I did a master's in economics and strategy in 2011. What's really interesting about what I do today, so my background is also in economics and politics, and my job is a kind of a combination of economics, politics, philosophy, communication, all in one, because when you're in the policy team, you really have to understand everything about the business. Like I have to know inside out what our business is doing, who's doing what, how things work, because my job is not only externally to tell people, hey, tell the story about Uber, argue for, trying to find plans of how to make change in a positive way for everyone, but also internally to then explain to everyone in company, like, for example, on the investment deal, someone sitting in San Francisco doesn't really understand the culture of the region and how, the changes that are happening in Saudi Arabia today, how really revolutionary it could be for the country, but also kind of the risk involved. So you really have to understand things holistically, and that's kind of where it helps, because I did a little bit of economics, a little bit of politics, a little bit of business, a little bit of philosophy. And when you put that in combination, you're able to truly advise someone, whether internally at Uber or externally when I'm talking to government, like holistically about what's happening and what we can do together. And that's kind of how it happens. It's a cool question. Thank you.
Ghassan, you're the first person. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.